الجزائر التي حققت مجمل الأهداف الإنمائية للألفية تلتزم بخطة عام 2030 للتنمية المستدامة.
Once the 2030 agenda was adopted by the international community in September 2030, Algeria adopted the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And for strong national response, an interministerial commission was established under the auspices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs while organizing a number of workshops for raising awareness. Algeria totally eliminated absolute poverty and established a comprehensive system for social protection.
الاستثمارات الفلاحية الكبرى سمحت بتوفير
Massive investments in agriculture allowed for diversity of food sources. Algeria covered a lot of ground towards achieving self-sufficiency and food security. Reducing the infant and maternal mortality rates has been achieved by consistent healthcare services.
سمح بتطور التعليم العالي المقدم مجانا مع ضمان وسائل التكوين المهني التي سمحت بإدماج المتكونين في سوق العمل.
The Algerian woman is an important partner in building the homeland and therefore has the same rights and duties as men. Building dams and water collection reservoirs by diversifying sources of water through seawater desalination allowed the provision of clean water and equitable distribution of water resources throughout the country. Algeria has an abundance of important sources of energy which are exploited diligently in order to provide clean and renewable energy. Significant results have been recorded in the area of labor, and that contributed significantly to reduction of unemployment and provision of decent work. Development of infrastructure throughout the country, which reflects the true efforts of the state in order to vitalize the national economy and its diversification. Algeria pursues a policy that would ensure equitable distribution among all citizens by distribution of revenues of economic growth. Expansion of cities and establishment of modern neighborhoods that have all the necessary amenities for life in order to make the living of citizens much easier throughout all Algerian cities. Curbing excessive consumerism has been attained through the control of production and monitoring of markets, while encouraging cyclical economy and mounting public awareness campaigns. Climate change is considered a major challenge that Algeria is working to overcome. Algeria exploits a coastal line that surpasses 1,600 kilometers and works to ensure a clean marine life in order to protect the coastline and the sea. Work is still underway in order to protect wildlife through monitoring national flora and fauna assets and in different environmental settings, while expanding sanctuaries and combating desertification. Algeria, a country that enjoys peace and security in a society that is inclusive, has started to initiate initiatives for international peace and coexistence. Algeria contributes to the achievement of SDGs at the regional and international levels through solidarity, cooperation, and training and exchange of expertise in different spheres. Concrete results have been attained in most of the SDGs, especially those that respond to the vital needs of the citizens. Responsibility, the culture of peace, and multilateralism are invested by Algeria in order to achieve the SDGs.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have just seen a video in the context of the Voluntary National Review of Algeria. It is my great pleasure to invite His Excellency, the Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Algeria, to make a presentation. Sir, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Mr. Minister, heads of delegations, I will now be presenting the Voluntary National Report of Algeria, which revolves around the 5 major issues as follows. After the introduction, I will give you an overview of the institutional organizations for implementing the SDGs, Algeria's achievements with the view to reaching the SDGs, challenges and national priorities that we have to meet, and elements of a roadmap for Algeria's SDG achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, Algeria is distinguished by the fact that it achieved the MDGs often before the deadline, such as reducing poverty below 0.8%, reducing food insecurity, attendance at schools, reduction of infant and maternal mortality, etc. The international community's adoption of Agenda 2030 today imposes new challenges upon us, given the complexity of the SDGs, which link economic, social, and environmental development together. Algeria has taken ownership of the 2030 Agenda and is committed to bringing strong national responses and responses which are at the level of or commensurate with the stakes and the challenges. I'll start my presentation by looking at institutional organization in implementing the SDGs. This involves the implementation of a national plan which involves all stakeholders and which is made up of a very complex exercise, one which is evolving over time. It's a work in progress, and which is adaptable to the needs of implementation of Agenda 2030. It started with the establishment of an intersectorial committee which covered and brought together the ministerial level departments, national institutions, the scientific community, all concerned by implementation of Agenda 2030 under the auspices of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. Prerogatives for preparing the voluntary national review and establishing a diagnosis of what public policies need to be put in place for reaching 2030 agenda were part of its mandate. Indeed, preparation of the VNR made it possible and was made possible by the inclusion of all of the institutions of state as a whole, as well as scientific researchers and those involved in the National Center for Science in developing the report. These contributions greatly enriched the report and were further enriched by consultations and contributions with civil society and the private sector, specifically through workshops that were organized to raise awareness about the SDGs in partnership with the UN. And here I'd like to thank the coordinator and president who's with us here today for that effort. The voluntary national report was put in place by the government in June 2019 and is the first stage towards achieving Agenda 2030. Under achievements of Algeria with a view to reaching the SDGs, we could mention the following. First, there is the alignment of national strategies with SDGs, which involves sustainable development and manageable development of natural resources, which have been a central concern in Algeria, as reflected in the law on land management enacted in 2001, as well as the law on protecting the environment in the context of sustainable development, a law that was enacted in 2003. We can indicate, based on the encouraging results obtained, that policies of and actions of the Algerian government have very often been in line with World Sustainable Development Goals. Thus, many of the targets in the area of development have already been achieved or we're very close to achieving, and I can include amongst them the following. A reduction of extreme poverty, which was target 1.1, and reduction of poverty as defined at the national level, target 1.2. Elimination of hunger, target 2.1. Elimination of the AIDS epidemic, tuberculosis, and malaria, target 3.3. Access for all to health care, procreative and sexual reproductive health, target 3.7. The benefits of universal health coverage, target 3.8. Elimination of the marriage of children's and its ban, full ban, as well as the banning of precocious, early, or forced marriage, target 5.3. Access for all to energy services, target 7.1. Reduction of violence and death rates associated with violence, target 16.1. And the guarantee for all to have a legal identity, target 16.9. Turning now to the SDGs, which are being reviewed in this session, and in order to meet the need to support citizens and ensure inclusion and equality, Algeria, with a view to leaving no one behind, has recorded the following results in this regard. Specifically, a school attendance rate of 97% in primary and middle school levels of education, an unemployment rate of 11.7% in 2018, which was target 8.5. More than 555,000 people who are disabled who benefit from a solidarity allocation, and gender parity between boys and girls, which is at a ratio of over 1 in favor of girls in secondary education. Implementation of a national strategy to counter flooding as well as the implementation of a national delegation to grapple with major risks. Reduction of violence and mortality rates associated with violence, target 16.1, as well as a guarantee for one and all of a legal identity, target 16.9, which I just said a moment ago. And I cannot forget but mention Algeria's contribution to restructuring of the foreign debt of a number of least developed countries for a total amount of $1.4 billion since 2010. This is target 17.4. And more than 9,000 scholarships for higher education granted to southern countries. And again, priority goes to our African continent, and this is target 17.9. However, in addition to those encouraging results, we still have many challenges to face in Algeria, such as the dimension of people. In this area, we need to improve responsibility for vulnerable people. We need to further encourage participation of women in the labor force. We need to reduce the environmental impact in cities. If we look at the planet dimension, another area that needs improvement is better use of water resources, consolidate and preserve biodiversity, improve renewable energies, and fight trafficking of weapons, corruption, and illicit flows of funds. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a roadmap in place which reflects the government's strong determination politically to achieve the 2030 agenda, and it revolves around four major thrusts. Raising awareness amongst the stakeholders, institutional actors, civil society, etc., closer integration of the SDGs in national policies, provide organization and financial means and information systems to achieve the goals, and periodic evaluation and following of the implementation to look at the degree of achievement of the SDGs. So these are the four major thrusts of our roadmap. Thank you. I thank the Secretary General of the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Algeria for this presentation. I now invite delegations to have an interactive dialogue with the presenting country. Before I give the floor to the first speaker, I would like to remind delegations to please observe the time limit of 2 minutes. The United Kingdom has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Your Excellency, for that very interesting voluntary national review presentation. Please could you share with us some of the challenges that you encountered in preparing for the voluntary national review? And how did the process help reshape your approach to handling development issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Norway congratulates Algeria with the VNR submitted to the HLPF 2019. We appreciate the openness and transparency of the review. We note the political processes that have taken place in Algeria over the past year. We understand there is no shortage of challenges, particularly when it comes to employment, export earnings, and foreign investments. A peaceful and stable society is an important precondition for economic growth. This can be a particular challenge in times of transition. Given your commitment to implement the SDGs, how can pursuing the 2030 agenda be helpful in the transition Algeria is in? Merci, thank you.
Thank you. South Africa.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. South Africa takes this opportunity to thank His Excellency, the Permanent Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for his excellent presentation, and wish to ask the following question. Could His Excellency present your national policy and strategy related to the necessary financial resources dedicated to cover and tackle the follow-up and the implementation of the SDG. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to thank Algeria, to congratulate Algeria and those other countries submitting their voluntary national review in this round. I would also like to thank Algeria for its concrete actions in implementing Agenda 2030 and African Union Agenda 2063. It is instrumental that we commend as Ethiopian delegation its efforts, Algeria in its efforts in restructuring its economy and diversifying its economic base, which is one of the foundations for sustainable economic growth and poverty eradication. I would like to ask the Algerian delegation if they can provide us some best practices how they managed to diversify their economy and where their focus, taking into account their comparative advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethiopia. And now, children and youth.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you. We fully appreciate the Algeria's report and its commitment under international agreements and also its commitment towards the implementation of the SDGs, particularly targets 10, 16, and 17. We noticed also the efforts that have been made by Algeria to support people's right to self-determination, particularly the support given to the Sahrawis and the Palestinian people in self-determination, while respecting the principle of respecting all the cultural diversity of the two states. However, we believe that the report by Algeria is a government report and not a national review. It doesn't really focus on the civil society and the participation of the stakeholders reference to, particularly groups led by youth, women, and immigrants. With regard to Target 18, the report focuses on the efforts made by states for social protection and for the hope that no one would be left behind. However, the report does not talk about any enforcement of the labor laws in agreement with the international agreements and international law, and also the ILO 87 agreement on the union rights that are violated in Algeria. And while the VNR talks about equal pay to equal work, the level of employment by the informal and private section is always not in favor of women. We also would have hoped that the VNR would talk about progress achieved towards restructuring and the democratic management of governments, as well as the fair distribution of wealth in view of the popular demands that request
Thank you for your comment. And now I invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to respond briefly, respecting the time limits. You have the floor, sir. And apologies for limiting your time. Thank you, Mr. President. Regarding the last question, I would invite the person who posed that question to read Algeria's report, to read it thoroughly, and they will find all of the responses to their concerns therein. Civil society was involved and is not here with us today for visa reasons. That is something unfortunate, but that is the way things stand. Regarding the other questions, I will try to be brief.
I would like at the outset to thank all the delegations for the interest they showed on the report of Algeria on the implementation of the SDGs. I would also like to express my pleasure at the very effective participation by all members who have were associated with us since we have embarked on our march since 2015, while respecting the concept of no one would be left behind. Development has a very special place in our government. This involves the scientific civil society members as well as others. Understanding the targets of the new Sustainable Development Goals is very simple because we have arranged for awareness campaigns. However, there are problems in controlling certain indicators, and this problem persists for reasons that I will summarize as follows. There are no sufficient information to cover all indicators, and we lack a special methodology with regard to the implementation of some indicators. This would probably require an overall complementary framework that can follow up and monitor all indicators to support the government activities. Mr. Chairman, the NVR allowed us to diagnose the public policies. It showed that many of the SDGs objectives, including those related to the social dimension, were included in our policies. This resulted in the creation of a peaceful, culturally diverse society willing to contribute to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. However, the 2030 Agenda cannot really work without the international solidarity relating to financing and technical abilities, as well as enhancing our abilities. Therefore, we don't really feel that we have, I believe that we have to use the ODS for the implementation of our development goals. Algeria will continue to depend on triangular cooperation, North-South cooperation, in the name of solidarity and prosperity and peace. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Algeria and his team for their presentation, as well as for the responses to the questions that were posed. This concludes the review of the report of Algeria. I would like to thank you, Mr. Permanent Secretary, for your presentation, and I wish you all the best for the implementation of the SDGs.